Just a day after resigning, Sri Lanka's former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa and his family have fled to a naval base in the northeast of the country to take shelter as violent protests have shaken the nation. Sources told NDTV that Rajapaksa and his family were flown in a helicopter to the naval base, which is 270 kilometers from the capital Colombo. Here too, protests have broken out. Since Monday, the homes of more than 50 politicians belonging to the ruling party have been set on fire by angry protesters overnight. 5 people, including a member of parliament, were killed in the violence that broke out on Monday when Rajapaksa's supporters, who were bussed in from the countryside, attacked protesters with sticks and clubs. For weeks now, there have been peaceful mass protests in Sri Lanka, mostly led by young people, by professionals, against the Rajapaksas and their handling of the economy. This is the worst economic crisis that Sri Lanka is facing ever. There's a huge shortage of food, fuel, medicines and other essentials as a result of this. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, though, is still defiant and refusing to resign, while his brother Mahinda stepped down on Monday. But all of this has done little to calm public anger. Well, as the situation deteriorates in Sri Lanka, joining us on NDTV this evening is Arjuna Ranatunga, former cricket captain and former minister straight from Sri Lanka. Mr. Ranatunga, let me just first ask you, your reaction to Gotabaya Rajapaksa's latest statement today, where he's tweeted appealing for calm, saying that all efforts will be made to restore political stability through consensus within a constitutional mandate and to resolve the economic crisis. In other words, he's not going anywhere.
Yeah, that's what we feel. But if you go back to yesterday, what has happened yesterday, we all know. But some of the chief priests in this country, religious leaders, went to see the president last night. Apparently, when they came out, they said that the president is very keen to have a prime minister, independent prime minister, which there were a couple of names came. Former Speaker Karu Jayasuriya to be appointed as a Prime Minister, caretaking Prime Minister, and government with the parliamentary all party leaders. So that is the conclusion they came up. But apparently they were supposed to meet today, and nothing has happened. Only unfortunate thing is this violence had to be stopped. Whether it is for the government institutions or the private entity, I think it should be stopped. This, I personally feel, knowing the Sri Lankan public, they are not acting the way they are acting today. There are some groups behind these people. I don't know whether it is done by the Rajapaksas or someone else, but that is something all are concerned, because we are a very peaceful nation compared to some of the other people. But why they come into the roads? Yes, can do protests, can shout at the politicians, throw stones, but firing houses, the government institution, it's not the solution for this crisis.
But can I ask you that would any solution where Gotabaya Rajapaksa remains president be acceptable to the protesters? Those who've been protesting peacefully have had a single point demand in the last few weeks, which is that Gota needs to go, right? So will even a caretaker temporary arrangement be acceptable to them under him?
I'm not expert on this. I'm not a legal guy, but what I was told, they have to appoint a caretaking government. When the caretaking government takes over, that is where, if necessary, the president can be taken off, or he can step down. So there are a lot of ideas, and a lot of people talk about it. But what they need now is to stabilize this country. First, stabilize the country by appointing a prime minister, appointing a very small cabinet, maybe about 10 or 15. Then take it up from there. I think I saw article, I saw news saying that the speaker has informed the president to call the parliament. I don't know whether there's a safety on some of the MPs, or whether we can start a parliament at this time. So we need to very quickly act on these things rather than sitting on the chairs and talking about it.
Right. How worried are you, though, that things have taken a critical turn for the worse? We've seen so many homes of members of the ruling party that have been set on fire by protesters. Things are clearly violent. You've had an MP losing his life. How worried are you?
The problem is why these protesters came into the road. that's mainly they were concerned about living standards. They were not asking for big things. They were asking for very basic needs for the children and for them. Then they were protesting for 30 days without a single violation. They were very, very calm, very peaceful, and only last morning with this Prime Minister's like supporters came into the temple trees and they wanted him to stay back. This is all set up by some of the ministers. And that is where all these people went to the golf face where all these peaceful demonstrators were staying, and that is where all these issues started. But what I personally feel, burning houses, burning government institutions or the vehicles, the police vehicle, it's not the solution. What they need to do is, if they have this particular protest, look at the end rather than having a military government. That is where I will say this is the exact thing. Some of these people wanted to have a military government if they are going to behave like this. So I'm little concerned about the situation which some of these people are going into, like burning the house.
But would you want, do you think Mr. Rajapaksa should step down as president? Will that help? Will that calm tempers?
I think it has to be under the constitution. I don't know the law, but apparently if the Prime Minister comes in, then he can step down as the president. So that is where I personally feel we should take on, rather than just throwing the president out. Then no one will be there to run the country. First, we have to have a small cabinet with the Prime Minister. Then the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa can step down, and I think we might have to consult the legal expertise and see how we can take it up. It's not a small thing. It's not a playground we are looking at.
Well, Mr. Ranatunga, one final question. The Rajapaksas have dominated the political landscape in Sri Lanka for years now, and this has been a stunning fall from grace in so many ways. In a sense, is this the end of the road for this political dynasty? Or never say never?
No, tell you honestly, I left Rajapaksas in 2008. Why I left Rajapaksas was I was not comfortable with some of the things they were doing. And unfortunately, Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa, he's one person who worked on the war. But unfortunately, the way they are trying to treat the Rajapaksas, why they got into this mess? Because they were so powerful after 2020. They were very arrogant, they were very cocky, the ministers were behaving like thugs. So this is where the entire country went to pieces. And what Rajapaksas did? Nothing. For the 2 years, they were not doing anything for the people. And I think it's end of the road for all the Rajapaksas. I think it has to, that is what people want.
All right. Well, Mr. Ranatunga, thanks for joining us, keeping a close eye there on the situation as it develops. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, joining us on NDTV now is Iran Wickramaratne, former State Minister of Finance of Sri Lanka, Member of Parliament. Mandana Ismail Abe Wickrama is the editor of the Sunday morning newspaper, and Ambassador Meera Shankar joining us as well today, former Indian diplomat who served as ambassador to the United States. Mr. Wickramaratne, to you first, how bad are things at the moment? Have you ever seen anti-government protests, this kind of anger at this scale in Sri Lanka?
No, this is the first time that we have seen such protest, and there has been a civilian uprising. The civilian uprising has been unprecedented. It's been going on now for several weeks. And unfortunately, it was a very peaceful civilian protest. Unfortunately, since yesterday, it has turned violent. It has turned violent, and that's very, very unfortunate. People don't have their basics. They don't have their gas for the cooking. They don't have their petrol and the diesel. They don't have their electricity and pharmaceuticals and basic essential foods. So naturally, people are reacting and responding to that.
But do you sense, that President Rajapaksa is under increasing pressure to step down? He has appealed for calm again today, and his tweets certainly don't indicate that he's going to step down anytime soon. But do you think that the pressure on him has increased?
Of course, the pressure on the Rajapaksa clan has increased. They have been basically dictating Sri Lanka's politics for the last 2 decades. And we were in an unprecedented situation where 5 members of the family were in the cabinet. 70% of the budget was controlled by them, and bad policy, bad management has led to this. And so the reactions are very spontaneous. So therefore, President Rajapaksa himself is severely under pressure, and there will have to be changes, and I think people are looking for drastic changes. So there will have to be a new government in office, I would say, within hours or within a day or two.
Okay, so you think it's inevitable. Mandana Abhivikrama, just to ask you on that, is that the sense that you're getting as well, that it's inevitable that sooner or later President Rajapaksa will have to step down? And what does that mean for the future of the Rajapaksa family in Sri Lankan politics?
Yes, definitely President Rajapaksa will have to step down eventually, because the people are relentless. People are not going to give up, because this was not something that happened overnight. It has been accumulating for some time, and given the unprecedented economic crisis that the country is facing, and the fact that the president himself has come out and acknowledged and apologized for the wrong economic policies that were adopted, that has basically caused this situation where the finance minister during the last parliamentary sessions announced that the country's usable reserves are now below $50 million. So given the crisis situation, and given there has been a continuous call for a change in the entire system for some time, but every time the people voted expecting that change, that never happened. So I think now patience have run out, and people have had, basically they're saying enough is enough. So this time they're not ready to give up, and definitely there needs to be a change in governance as well as government, for the people to get that confidence back, to know that the country is back on track to returning to some form of normalcy, because this is going to be a long-drawn battle to address the economic crisis. So as for the Rajapaksa family, given the way that the Rajapaksa family has handled this crisis, and even yesterday the Prime Minister's meeting with the party supporters, and which eventually led to violence, where peaceful protesters were assaulted, finally resulting in a retaliation that is still ongoing in certain areas.
If they go, they're not going to go quietly. That seems to be the message.
Well, it seems like it, because, at a time when there's a state of emergency, we had the country's prime minister addressing a gathering of thousands of people. There is a law prohibiting that kind of action, especially during a state of emergency, inciting anger as well as unlawful assembly.
Right.
This has caused lawyers have complained to the IGP today, calling for action against those who incited that anger to create this kind of violence.
Absolutely. These are actually quite incredible scenes, because we've seen that many of those protesting all these weeks have been peaceful protesters, as we said, students, professionals, young people, in a sense, politically a leaderless movement in that sense. We have Shanakya Rasamanikam, who's also a member of parliament from Sri Lanka, joining us as well. Tell us about the fact that, this has been a people-led movement, and that's why the anger that people have against the Rajapaksas, against the government, is so raw and so real. But what happens next? What do you predict? Do you also think that the president will have to step down in the next day or two?
Well, there is absolutely no other way that Sri Lankans are going to accept any other solution other than his resignation. And the Rajapaksa family's actions yesterday have prompted more anger amongst people. People who were peaceful protesters were instigated, and they were beaten, and then and we saw what happened throughout the country last night, and even right now there are reports of some SLPP, that's the main government party's offices, being destroyed just a few hours ago in other parts of the country. So still the violence is continuing in the country, and it's completely the fault of the Rajapaksas. And the public anger is even at a higher level right now. Because there are rumors that President Prime Minister Rajapaksa and his entire extended family are now hiding in a naval camp in the eastern city of Trincomalee, and there are public gathered outside the naval camp. And the question that the public keep asking is, how do they get special treatment if he's not the Prime Minister anymore? He's just an ordinary MP. So I'm an ordinary MP right now. So do I get special treatment to go and hide in a naval camp if the need occurs tomorrow? So unless President Gotabaya Rajapaksa resigns, I do not think this uprising will stop, and it will only gather even more momentum, because naturally President Rajapaksa is the one to be blamed for all these economic hardships that the country is facing. It's his poor mismanagement of the economy. Right now,
and it's clear that the protesters are not going to back off until he goes. I just wanted to ask Ambassador Meera Shankar about that. We've seen a statement from India today as well. India basically, talking about how it's supportive of Sri Lanka's democracy, stability, economic recovery, pointing out the kind of aid it has given. Is there an opportunity for India here, through this aid and through this help to Sri Lanka, to cement its ties with Colombo?
Yes, as a close neighbor of Sri Lanka, naturally, India is concerned about what is happening in Sri Lanka and the hardships that the people of Sri Lanka are facing. So if you see the statement that has been given, we have really expressed support for Sri Lanka institutionally, that is for democracy, stability, and economic recovery. So we hope that the situation stabilizes and that through normal democratic processes, the people of Sri Lanka are able to express their choice, and that the changes that come about will help to bring a greater economic recovery to Sri Lanka, because it is the hardships that people are facing which have really fueled the uprising, and the sense that it has been mishandled by the government in power.
But my question was really in the context of, Colombo's growing proximity to China in recent years in particular, and the fact that this crisis could give New Delhi a chance to really change that, couldn't it?
Well, Nidhi, I would say that we should look at it less as a geostrategic opportunity, but as an opportunity to be a good neighbor and to help the people of Sri Lanka. And if in that process, your relationship with Sri Lanka is cemented, all to the good. But I don't think that we should see a geopolitical opportunity in the hardship that the Sri Lankan people are facing. Our support has to be for the people there, and we should do what we can to help mitigate the crisis and try to expedite an economic recovery, which is going to be a hard and long road, because as one of your panelists said, Sri Lanka's reserves are down to only $50 million. They've already defaulted on their debt. They are in negotiations with the IMF for a package to help stabilize the economy. The IMF will naturally seek, measures for fiscal prudence, what kind of conditionalities it imposes or negotiates.
That will probably cause further pain.
Which will be difficult. It's going to be a difficult path, whoever comes or whoever is in power in Sri Lanka.
Mr. Vikramaratne, just to ask you whether, again, just for your just to get your perspective on this, there is also some commentary about, the president's sort of Sinhalese majoritarianism also feeding into what we're seeing happening in the country at the moment. Is that a factor in these protests?
I think it's not a secret that the president, when he was campaigning, basically campaigned to get majoritarian votes. And therefore, the country naturally was divided based on race and religious lines. One of the things that has happened in this protest is you're saying that people have come together. A much clearer Sri Lankan identity has emerged as a result of this. We need to look beyond that, because I think we're just in the transition. The Rajapaksas are basically on their way out. And we need to look at the transition. I was so glad to hear the former diplomat Meera saying that our relationship with India is not just based on geopolitics, but it's based on a long cultural tie with India, and also suppliers credits that have come from India. And the new government, when it takes office, we're looking to expand those ties. Our foreign policy has always been independent foreign policy. We are an island, and we see India as a friend. We also see it as an opportunity. For basically, Sri Lanka is placed in a position as an entry point into India for businesses and for investment and for goods and services and so forth. And Sri Lanka is also on a very busy shipping route, and there are so many great opportunities here. And we want to get over this current crisis and welcome investments into this country.
Okay,
and I think
so you're already looking at the post Rajapaksa world. My question is whether it is really the end of the road for them. Mandana, if you'd want to take that, politically, this was a family that has dominated Sri Lankan politics for decades. Is this really the end of the road?
At least for the time being, it seems it is, because given the policies of the continuous, like the previous Mahinda Rajapaksa government as well as the current Gotabaya Rajapaksa government, you see that certain policies, like although initially a lot of people anticipated change, you see that it has not changed much. And now that the people have lost faith, setting fire to the Rajapaksa ancestral home and then destroying the monument set up for their late parents. And today another statue of their father, D.A. Rajapaksa, was brought down by the people in their own constituency. So like you see a lot of anger building up against the Rajapaksa family. But then again, that is something that we will have to see in the future, because it also depends on the next governments that come into power as well, how they take on the policies, whether they will deliver on the promises made, whether they will bring about that changes in the system and governance that is required at the moment, whether there will be political will to bring about the constitutional changes required, abolishing the executive presidency, and then bringing in giving more powers to parliament. And there are lots of constitutional changes also that require at the moment, so that there can be that system put in place. So whether the Rajapaksa family will have a chance to return will depend on that as well, because if by any chance, if the next governments fail to deliver, then once again, maybe a few elections down the line, there could be a possibility.
Yeah, you never say never, especially in politics in this region. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us, keeping a close eye on that developing story in Sri Lanka. Very worrying how things have spiraled there, particularly in the last 24 to 48 hours. Thanks for joining us.